Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Kat Spada.
I'm AC Lamberty. Kat, before we get into it today, which one of us is Blunt Man? Which one of us is Chronic? I need you to make the call.
Blunt Man is Silent Bob, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's hard for me not to go on hair color lines, but I think I'm Blunt Man and you're Chronic.
We'll ask the expert later.
Yeah, for sure. Well, today we are talking about the debut documentary feature from Sav Rodgers, Chasing Amy, which explores the complicated legacy of Kevin Smith's 1997 film, Chasing Amy, not only in Sav's own life, but over nearly 3 decades of dissection regarding its mainstream representation of queer stories through the lens of the cis, straight, white male gaze.
Do you understand why I love this movie so much?
No.
For Sav Rodgers, a queer kid growing up in Kansas, role models came from an unexpected source.
When I was 12, I had a movie where the gay and lesbian characters were good and funny and out. They were able to live as their authentic selves.
Chasing Amy.
Chasing Amy.
Chasing Amy.
The third film from director Kevin Smith.
It's about a guy who falls in love with a lesbian.
But Sav's about to find out. Life's not about finding your heroes.
Welcome to the house that Amy built.
It's about finding yourself.
Joining us for our conversation is the director of Chasing Amy himself, Sav Rodgers. A filmmaker and writer originally from Kansas, Sav's film was born out of a TED Talk that he gave in 2018, appropriately titled The Rom-Com That Saved My Life. Named one of 2024's Forbes 30 Under 30, Sav is also the founder and executive director of the Transgender Film Center, a nonprofit aiming to help trans creators bring finished films to audiences around the world. Welcome, Sav.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, y'all. That was quite the intro. I appreciate it. And as this conversation unfolds, maybe I'll be able to help tell you what man and who's Chronic.
Thank you. Okay, before we get into it, how are we all doing with the Ben Affleck J-Lo divorce news? Do we have any feelings, thoughts? How's our boy? Etc.
Please, the two of you first. I'll weigh in, but I'm curious what the vibe is here.
Bad. I'm doing bad with it. I think they're honestly truly meant to be together. I never cared, and now I strongly do for some reason. Oh wait, what's that reason? Is it called "This Is Me ... now?" followed by the greatest love story ever told? Yes, crazy. Yes, it is.
Old Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean,
shit.
I don't know.
That's wild.
She's a poet. I love them. I guess I don't know. I'm doing bad. I can't wait for them to get back together.
Yeah, true.
Honestly, so fair. I think I have kept myself removed from any celebrity gossip, even if it's Ben Affleck related, which is the thing that probably got me into entertainment. Was like reading tabloids to see what this dude was doing, which as an adult is so funny because there's never been a man who wants to be photographed less than
Truly.
him.
That is deeply respectful of you as well.
Well, I don't think you can go through the process of making a film like Chasing Amy and still feel like it's your business to be invested into celebrities totally. As concepts.
Yeah.
I think the Joey interview set me straight real bad.
Absolutely, which I have many questions about, but would love to jump right in both about Chasing Amy and Chasing Amy itself. Kat, can you explain what the View Askew-universe is and Mallrats and Chasing Amy and all of this? This is a world that I am quite unfamiliar with, to be honest, outside of seeing the doc.
Yeah, I mean, Sav will absolutely be able to fact check me on some of this stuff, but I'm squarely a millennial, right? So I'm a young fan of Kevin Smith. I feel like I'm on the younger end of his target audience. But that means that when I was in middle school, the early DVDs of his movies were in heavy rotation. So I would go to sleepovers and watch Mallrats and Chasing Amy with friends. And then just for my personal connection, I guess, I've been podcasting for over, this is my 11th year officially as a podcaster, and listening to the Smodcast, streaming on the internet, streaming from my laptop, was an early one of the early podcasts that I was listening to. And I feel like at a certain point, like there was kind of a hard shift for me when I turned about 21, where I like couldn't really consume anything that was like straight guys talking. Like that kind of shift from growing up listening to like morning shock jocks and then like Smodcast and even Adam Carolla, who I'd listened to from Loveline, you know, like I feel like at a certain point there was that like tip where I was like, love you, Kevin Smith, I'm good. And I sort of moved on from that. But like that said, you know, I was always like aware, you know, of the donations that he made after the Me Too and the Weinstein revelations. And I have such a special place in my heart for like Dogma, which helped me become an atheist and all that good stuff that happens. So yeah, like I definitely grew up with Kevin Smith, and that's something that, you know, even just as like a little girl, am I the target audience for Kevin Smith as like an 11-year-old at a sleepover with other preteens? No. And yet we were watching his movies. So that's something I think that's a real testament to like his being tapped into pop culture in a way.
Sure. Sav, do you have like a particular relationship with Kevin Smith's work or like the work of independent filmmakers at the time? Like what was your entry point, I guess, into Chasing Amy itself? Yeah.
I mean, you know, we talk about it in the film, and I've certainly, you know, talked about this a lot. The reluctant mythologizing that I think filmmakers do when they're asked this question of like, hey, like, what's the reason, right? And if I had to put a reason on it is, as a closeted queer trans kid in suburban Kansas, you know, growing up in the 2000s, I was dealing with a lot of harassment at school. And so Chasing Amy was my lifeline at a time where I desperately needed one. How I got into Kevin Smith was that, one, I saw the 2003 Daredevil movie starring Ben Affleck, and Kevin Smith was like the coroner in that. And so when I saw Chasing Amy, I was like, hey, it's that guy from Daredevil. Didn't know he was the director. But my mom loved Kevin Smith. You know, she loved Clerks. You know, she loved a lot of independent filmmakers coming out of like Sundance in the 90s, the ones that got like the pie in the sky dream deal that every independent filmmaker has been chasing ever since. She didn't know they were independent filmmakers. She was just like, these are filmmakers I like: Quentin Tarantino, Spike Lee, Michael Moore, etc. And so we had their movies at home on physical media. So we had like VHS tapes, we had DVDs, blah, blah, blah. And I was going through a major phase where I was just like watching Ben Affleck. And so because he was in Daredevil, and I was like, great. So I was like going to Half Price Books in Olathe, Kansas, getting movies like Changing Lanes. Not all of them were winners. And so, or at least for an 8-year-old, right? I should reassess it as an adult. But I saw Chasing Amy as just a movie that we had at home, and I asked my mom if I could watch it. And what I found in that movie was immense comfort from, one, a kid who deeply wanted to feel the kind of romantic love that is talked about in that movie. Two, I was a huge geek, you know, so they were comic book writers. That was fun. Three, it had Ben Affleck in it, so I was willing to watch it at least once. But the part that I didn't realize would become a big deal for me is the fact that the movie had openly queer characters who were not solely defined by queerness. They were interesting. They were funny. They had they had a sense of humor, you know, taken from somebody in Kevin Smith's life, if not his own sense of humor, right? And so what I found was that this movie was extremely approachable for a kid who had no language to talk about how he felt. And so the movie was a lifeline for years. I would watch it obsessively because, you know, I was dealing with a lot of like suicidal ideation as a 12-year-old because, you know, I was getting so much shit at school for seeming queer. I didn't even know I was queer yet. And so it became this like this form of solace that I could turn to this movie and watch it whenever I wanted. Now, I did tell everybody this was my favorite movie, so I was not good at being closeted at all. Although, you know, Google searches were fairly new when we were growing up. But, you know, if anybody had looked up this movie, they would have figured it out, I suppose. But I just loved it, and I evangelized for it for years. And it became a point of curiosity that this movie that quite literally saved my life and helped me realize that filmmaking, you know, was a thing that I could do, an outlet for storytelling. that it was also this divisive movie in which a lot of lesbians and queer women specifically took umbrage with it for a multitude of things in Chasing Amy, including the depiction of a lesbian falling in love with a man and being in a relationship with him. Some bisexual women and bisexual people take umbrage with the fact that the word bisexual was never said in Chasing Amy. But it also depicts this fluidity of sexuality that, in my personal opinion, kind of defies the need to necessarily label that. But it's this interesting thing where this thing that saved my life is directly at odds with the experience of so many other queer people that I thought, there's a story there. I don't know what it is, but we're going to explore. And so that eventually leads into the creation of Chasing Amy, which is the feature documentary that I spent 6.5 years of my life making, directing, promoting, etc. That features my own personal coming of age against the backdrop of Chasing Amy. It starts around the time where I give the TED Talk about what Chasing Amy meant to me. In 8 minutes, Kevin Smith sees that within an hour of it being online.
No way.
It was wild to me. And then it sets into motion the events of the documentary, where I talk to people like Kevin Smith and Joey Lauren Adams, Jason Lee, Scott Mosier, Guinevere Turner about Chasing Amy, its cultural legacy among queer people, and how the story shifts into my personal coming of age as I figure out that I'm trans and the kind of filmmaker that I want to be. And so that's the short version, believe it or not. We have 92 minutes to get into it when you see the film.
Now, I think the thing that people maybe don't get about Kevin Smith, or like they don't if they aren't super familiar, is that like, yeah, you kind of come for the comic book stuff and the pop culture and the Batman, but like he's a deeply romantic man. And so there's such a like people who are lonely, I think can find so much in his movies. Like AC, you've probably just now watched Chasing Amy for the first time. Like, what did you bring to that experience as someone not necessarily well-versed in the universe?
Well, I was going to say, I saw the documentary Chasing Amy before I saw Chasing Amy, and then watched Chasing Amy afterwards and was like, oh, I was really kind of bracing for something more like quote unquote problematic or inflammatory. And it was not that at all, in a way that was really touching and I thought was really empathetic and very nuanced. And in general, I love anything that's about like a like couple that has an arrangement, or like anything that's kind of like about a relationship that's kind of different in some way, or like negotiations that are made. And I don't know, I just thought it was kind of a beautiful text about like breakups in general, like even between the two best friends. I think it's more about that than about like purely a sexuality film, which I thought was really great. And I think Ben Affleck was like kind of the perfect choice to be in it. He just is, I don't know, there's just something about his kind of particular stardom that like really worked for me in a Kevin Smith film. I don't know, but I really liked it. And it truly had me thinking, could this be made today? Like, I don't know. I wonder what the kind of discourse around a nuanced film like this would be in the present day. It was really an interesting thought exercise for me, at least. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to tack onto what you're saying, you use the word problematic, which is incredibly imprecise, which is part of the frustration with talking about Chasing Amy, is because people say it's problematic. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, you have to define, because there are so many different things that people take umbrage with. But, when I look at the film, I don't see anything in my personal capacity. That doesn't mean that I don't think there aren't valid critiques about the movie. But as I'm watching it as Sav Rodgers, the person, and not the media critic, what I see is something similar to what you're describing, which is this beautiful story about relationships that happens to, have these different elements in there. And there's a lot of nuance, but also, I can understand why people would be upset, especially in the context of it coming out in 1997, when Claire of the Moon, Go Fish, and Desert Hearts are the handful of lesbian films that are accessible. And accessible is a generous word for the state of home video release for queer films in the 80s and 90s. And so I can understand why people are like, oh, I heard this movie has a lesbian in it, and then they're immensely disappointed when they go to see it. It's and there's a lot of other valid critiques that are raised about Chasing Amy in the film, but it's that nuance.
Yeah, it's we often come across the question of like, could this be made today? I mean, whether we're talking about a movie from like the 70s or 10 years ago, and I think that's something that changes so quickly that it's like, I'm a bisexual in a relationship with a man, and like I don't even think about this question so often, and then every once in a while someone's like, no, you're not, or here's my problem with whatever, and I'm just like, oh. Right. Is this still the question? Is this still the question we're dealing with? Or like, my people in my life who were like, oh, well, I had this label on myself and then my partner transitioned. And so does my label have to change? Does that word have to mean something to other people? And like, these are not questions Kevin Smith is concerned with in the making of this movie. But like everyone else is a lot more bothered by it maybe than the people it bothers. You know what? I don't know. That didn't make any sense, but I feel like you get what I'm saying. That does feel
true to life in a way. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I don't know. That's particularly just what I loved about the movie. It felt so specific and like insular to this group of people. Yeah, I don't know. I feel you, Kat.
But it's also so great to have this in the nerd cluster because like, what is nerddom other than like, actually, that's not what happened canonically in episode whatever or issue whatever. Like, there's so much of like, what else are we going to do but sit around and just dissect and everything. Totally. That just feels like, yeah, it feels very real. It feels like, the differences that we have with people in different parts of the country, different parts of the world too. Like, that's something, Sav, that's interesting to me about your story is like the geography of where you come from and then having access to the VHS auteur generation. Because I think that really was the big shift in the 90s was like in the 70s, filmmakers who were changing culture were doing that at the multiplex. And then in the 90s, it was like the guys who grew up on those movies getting to distribute their like kind of more artsy or like niche films through this like slow burn. And now this is like the next generation of that is being able to then look inward and be able to put something on the internet. Like it's a little bit about cinema also.
Yeah. I mean, the movie is both a love letter to my wife, Riley, who, I hope everybody gets to fall in love with over the course of the movie, the way that I did in real life. And also cinema itself, and it's interesting, like being in this era of filmmaking when I so desperately wanted to make films in the era that Kevin got to, where you could make a festival film that did well, and then you could have another directing job lined up. So many films go to streaming or the internet now to die because there's no marketing and there's no support for it. And so, something that I've always really admired about Kevin is that he can always meet his audience where they're at and he can galvanize them and they will meet him where he wants them to meet him. So, whether it's merchandise, a speaking engagement, when he was doing college tours, whether it's a home video release, like he has had a dedicated group of fans since 1994 with his very first film. And again, like Kevin is kind of emblematic of like the American independent film dream because everybody before Kevin wanted to be George Lucas, that right. was the, or Cassavetes maybe, but mostly George Lucas, right? When you would go to film school. And for 2 decades, it was Kevin Smith. And now I don't know, I feel old now, so I don't know who people are saying they want to be now, but
Brady Corbet.
Like Ari Aster, like, I don't know.
Ari Aster sounds about right. But that is what it is, and so I'm grateful that we were able to connect with audiences so much to the festival circuit and to make connections there, because that was a group of people who were seeking out a film that maybe wasn't aligned with something they would immediately want to see. Like, I recognize Chasing Amy documentary as a pitch is a bad pitch. But, come for if you're a Kevin Smith fan, come for the fandom, stay for everything else. That's just it's a pathway into this other love story.
Totally.
Well, I think the main thing that I really want us to get into, my personal issue that I want to get into is fandom in general, and like the word and the concept of fandom, because there's a lot to dig into here. And I was thinking about it. I watched your movie with, again, my straight male partner who is a fan. You can see that I'm recording among his comic books and figurines. In fact, he found these. He wanted me to show you before our recording, which are the Chasing Amy figurines that were made.
The goatee work is incredible, actually.
I know. I'll take a picture of these for social, and it comes with this little enamel pin as well.
Look at that.
Incredible.
Shout out to Steven Silver, who did those action figures in the animation style.
Cool.
You know, those in-action figures, they've been going strong for at least the last 10 years, and they continue to build a fan base. And actually, we were going to do a stop motion sequence with those figures, but just not enough time, not enough money.
You know, maybe Criterion release, we'll get funding for that.
I was going to say Criterion can fund my original vision, what the wraparounds look like.
Love it.
But you know, like I certainly cling in some ways to like podcasting and other ways where I'm like, oh, I used to host a podcast about Beverly Hills 90210, and so often I'd be like, oh, I'm an 90210 scholar, you see. Like I was trying to kind of move away from being like, oh, I'm a super fan. It's like, no. I've done so much research. No. It's not just fandom. Like fandom is this small thing when fandom obviously is enormous. And so I feel like that's something I wanted to ask you about, is like being a sort of archivist and being a documentarian and taking your fandom and legitimizing it in a way. Like, I just kind of wanted to like dive into that a little bit, because I felt like it was just making me ask questions about my own relationship to being critical of the media that I love.
First of all, I don't think anybody is a documentarian because they're not nosy, right? So put that out of the way. You know, I was very curious about all of these things and these people, and, you know, to put all my cards on the table, you know, this was my dream movie to make, but because I felt like there was a deeper story there, and I didn't know what the story was, but it's just that gut feeling. And so it could have very easily just been like a straightforward fandom documentary of like, isn't Kevin great? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we've seen that documentary a lot. And I wasn't interested in making that. And so this Chasing Amy is only, I think, emotionally effective because everybody's willing to go there with me. Everybody's willing to have like a real conversation. And it was more than I certainly had bargained for. But I think what had happened is because I had given the TED Talk, and I'm so vulnerable in the TED Talk about what Chasing Amy meant to me, while also acknowledging the critiques of Chasing Amy, that people felt like they could trust me and talk to me about these real things, because, you know, that's the person I am. And so if you like anything about Chasing Amy, you know, please thank the many documentary participants who, you know, took the time to be in it, and indulge in their respective fandoms, but also their collective memories. You know, there are so many people in Chasing Amy who are talking heads who both love the movie and have problems with it.
Yeah.
We try to come from this nuanced place. From the outset of the movie, I knew that there would be no illusion that I was unbiased about what Chasing Amy meant to me. However, that didn't mean that I couldn't let other people speak for themselves and raise these like really valid critiques about Chasing Amy. Again, just because I don't share that life experience doesn't mean that it's not worth listening to.
Right.
I found these arguments to be very compelling, and not mean-spirited in the way that I think when you're an artist and you like put yourself out there, it's very easy to dismiss any critique as like, well, they just didn't understand it or whatever. And I think in some cases, maybe some people didn't understand Chasing Amy, and we didn't include those talking head interviews, you know? But for anybody who, you know, we talked to, if they had a strong reaction to it, I think it just showed like the diverse subjectivity of cinema and like what it means to like respond to something. And so for me and my fandom, I tried to curb any instincts to like give anybody too much credit. You know, I certainly had a narrative that I was telling myself in the absence of more information, which is AKA the PR machine, right?
Right.
You're promoting a movie, you only hear about the good parts typically, or else then that becomes that becomes rabid fandom media speculation and things like that. But I wanted something that was balanced and honest. And where did I learn that? I learned that from Chasing Amy, right?
Yeah. And you see that happen throughout the film. Like as a viewer, you're all along for the ride with that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that are structurally similar to Chasing Amy, right? So not just the ending, which, I'm happy to spoil if this is like a spoilery podcast, but,
sure.
But there's a lot of structural things that are similar because my life ended up paralleling Chasing Amy in ways that I couldn't have anticipated. Like if I had written this as a screenplay, people would have been like, that's too on the nose, don't you think?
Right.
But it really happened. It all really happened. And so, fandom was a huge jumping off point for me. And I continue to be a fan of things, but I just don't think you can go through this experience and like still be as much of a fan of everything as I was, because this was a very sobering experience where honestly, I mourn the loss of a belief system in so many ways, having gone through this experience. And so it's like, I try to like retain as much of the optimism as the person at the beginning of this journey had. But sometimes it's challenging because this whole thing was very sobering.
You say, this piece of media saved my life, right? Like, who can argue with that? Like, that's about as strong of a statement as you can make about loving a movie, right? But I feel like there are people who will hold something in that part of their hearts, and then they'll go online and use that to fuel and that's why you're ruining my life, or that's why you're ruining my childhood, or that's why you owe me something.
Pathetic.
And that's gross, obviously. And then there's the other side, which is being able to both and it and say this thing is this special to me. It's this special to me. But, I hold the other thing that I see, or that the way that I grow. Even now I'm like, oh, I like Kevin Smith, I think is a good guy. And then watching your movie, I was like, oh yeah, got a lot of weird messages out of Mallrats when I was 11,
Right.
Don't think that was great for me to be absorbing, at the same time, and being like, that's okay. That's okay that I saw that and I've grown and I've learned,
Absolutely. I mean, I also am in terms of fandom, is it appropriate to have a savior who can never do anything wrong ever, can never make a mistake, can never grow, can never change, right? I think about Star Wars fandom, for example.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
And the retcon of the narrative that George Lucas his opinions were always popular now. And I'm just that's not true. He got shit for virtually everything he did after Empire, right? And so, I just think it's okay if not everything works for you, not every Star Wars show that comes out is my favorite thing in the world, but I'm not looking for someone to blame for it. Not everything is designed for me. And so when I hear this fandom, when I hear this toxic fandom shit, I just roll my eyes, because I'm the whole world is not catered to you. You can you can disagree with something. You can put it in your mind that this is a headcanon, it's not canon, whatever. It does. It's okay. Ideally, what I found is that what fandom gave me was a place in the world to start making my own connections and to fortify those things. And I think we are living in a very, very, very lonely time to be alive. We have never been more disconnected from in-person community. Between the pandemic, the advent of the internet, there's a lot of, online weird cultural things that are isolating people in the name of 5 billionaires telling you this is how you should live your life. And if you don't subscribe to this, you're not a real man or whatever. There's a crushing amount of illiteracy, lack of media literacy. So when I see these fandom things, I'm these are endemic of the larger societal problems that we're having. It's not just a handful of geeks without social skills. This is a real issue that we're having. And so the way that I try to engage with fandom is like, hey, everybody who made this is a person.
Yeah.
My favorite filmmaker, not every film they make is like my favorite film, you know?
Yeah.
And by putting people on a pedestal, we're doing ourselves no favors, because we're just setting up like premeditated resentments then. Because if somebody is always perfect and you never give them grace to make a mistake or whatever, then we're really doomed, because then, you know, you're failing to account for the fact that the people who make the things you like are fallible, human, they're capable of growth, they're capable of change, or they're capable of doing something great, and then completely swinging the pendulum the other way to the point where Harry Potter tattoos have more regrets than any kind of gender affirming care. So like, I just think that like we, as fans of things, as somebody who's a big fan of things, like nobody can see my background right now, but I have my comic books here. I have action figures. You know, I love Mass Effect. I have Mass Effect tattoos. You know, like I love Pokemon. I love whatever, you know, like I love the things that I love very much. And I also have to divorce myself from the notion that these things love me back. It's okay.
Totally. I think something like, as a fan or consumer, or like Kat, like you were saying earlier, a scholar of things, I really just appreciate learning as much as I can about something, no matter what the perspective is. And I think Chasing Amy does that in providing new viewpoints, especially from like the women and queer people around the independent cinema movement at the time. Like I really loved that, and can imagine like as a fan of movies at the time, or Kevin Smith specifically, like at that being so additive to the fandom and to the conversation was like really amazing. Like just going into this documentary and fully learning something that illuminating was really cool to me to experience, and also was just like one of my favorite parts of the documentary. But yeah, I don't know, like this conversation just has me thinking about how I consume things, and like identifying as a fan versus I don't know, like scholar feels more apt to me, Kat. It's just like, I don't know, it resonates. But like I'm just thinking about like Lady Gaga, like I hate Joanne. I don't know what I could say. Like it's a flop, but I still love her, you know? Like I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel you. And like at this point, if you want to call me a Chasing Amy scholar, like I think I've earned that. But you know, you know, like I did the work for 6.5 years, you know, like, you know, I also think about like these like YouTube channels who like are archivists, as you said, Kat, of like every fact from every like token piece of anything or whatever. Like there are people who dedicate their lives to like preserving other people's work in like such a beautiful way. And so I think like when you have that, like, I think it is easy for anybody's, let's call it work. Let's say all of this is work, right? For some people, this is their livelihood, that they like report on other people's things, right? And then if you feel like you're being challenged, right, it can, all of us, you know, often sometimes feel like we're the sum product of our work, you know, especially in the United States where work is rewarded. Sure. And so I can understand how like being told you're bad at your job, so to speak, or the thing that you hold most precious in your identity can feel threatening. And also, it's not the end of the world. You have to have that like inner peace with yourself. So if somebody, like, there are people who say shitty things about Chasing Amy on the internet. Like sometimes, like there was this very angry tweet that I saw. I was like, oh, I got to get off this website. And it was saying that like trans men have always been like the weakest pillar of the LGBTQ community, and that I was promoting trans misogyny with this movie.
Oh my
God,
I'm claiming that. I like need a shirt. Like weakest pillar.
Well, 100%. But I was also like, I don't think you. It was like very much the Princess Bride of like, I don't think that means what you think it means. Like,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so I was like, okay, like, you know, like somebody's allowed to not like the idea of this movie, but like they can't make a judgment for themselves because they haven't seen it. And even if they have seen it and they do hate it, you know, unless they're like harassing me on the internet, that's their thing to own and not my thing to own. And so like, I think fandom could be cured if everybody just like touched grass a little bit and calmed the hell down, because it feels like everything when it's like the thing that holds up the most space in your life. But like, I think what you see over the course of Chasing Amy is that like at the beginning, Chasing Amy, if my life was a pie chart, Chasing Amy represents a significant chunk of the pie chart because it's where I found community. It's where I, seem interesting in conversations. It is the thing that saved my life as a 12-year-old, right? And then over the course of the movie, you see things start to shift for me. I am making my own movies, right? I fall in love. I don't need Chasing Amy as like my surrogate for like how to fall in love, Totally. I'm finding other interests, hobbies. I'm making connections with other people. And so of course, Chasing Amy takes up less real estate in my life than before, right? But let's say like I became like like my dad, like a gaming YouTuber, right? And like I wanted to do a channel on Baldur's Gate 3. I would have to work then to like separate like, okay, right. Baldur's Gate is not my identity, but it is a thing I spend a significant amount of my time on. And I have to preserve like the fun of it and not like be so possessive of it that it makes me an asshole. I don't know.
I think about that a lot with like when you talk to Joey in the movie, like in general, I've thought about this a lot with like when somebody quote unquote gets me too'd. I love using the passive voice on that phrase. The other people, but the women or the people in positions of like victimhood whose work then goes away. Like I sometimes think about that. There was a Casey Affleck movie a couple of years ago that had a female director. And I remember being really excited for her. Like, oh, cool. She's like finally got her second movie coming. And so often for a woman director, the second movie never happens. And so I remember like seeing that coming and then being like, oh, now this movie dies. And this movie dies because of some guy's shitty behavior. And all of the other people, the thousands of people who worked on this project, now what can they do with that?
Right.
I don't mean to derail it into that conversation. I'll just leave it at like thinking about the ripple effects when you bring in work and identity into that. But AC, what were you going to say?
No, totally. I was like thinking something very similar, which is just like as a filmmaker watching Chasing Amy, I was just really struck by like just thinking about how much negotiation you might have had to do with yourself about like what we are seeing on screen, both with the interview with Joey Lauren Adams. Like that is such a vulnerable interview and kind of like getting your shit rocked a bit. I was like, oh my God, like showing like being vulnerable to enough to put that on camera. And then like also just negotiating your transition and like your identity on camera. Like all of that was very fascinating to me as a filmmaker. And I wonder if you like how much you negotiated that with yourself, like how much you thought about that, or if that was always going to be present in the finished product.
This might sound dramatic, but please believe me when I say that post-production on Chasing Amy was the most emotionally horrific period of my adult life.
I can literally not imagine, truly.
Because keep in mind, I wasn't planning on being in it when we decided we were going to make this movie, and I had acquiesced to being in it, with the comp being Minding the Gap by Bing Liu, who, includes his own story in that movie in such a beautiful, thoughtful way. It was a huge reference while we were making Chasing Amy. And by the time we got to post, everybody was like, Sav, the movie's about you. And I was like, fuck off. No, it's not. Like, absolutely not. I wanted to do this like more anthropological, scholarly, if you will, film that was emotionally tender and real, but it was going to be more about, Kevin's journey, Joey's journey, etc. And by the time, I had conceded to being in it about 15 minutes, and we did the version of the cut that I wanted, and it just didn't work. It didn't work. And I was like, I had to have a big conversation with myself that was like, all of these people around you who you trust, who you put on this project, who are not here because they're making a ton of money, but because they believe in you and believe in the story, are telling you that you need to be in it. You might need to trust them. And so I did. And the process was like nails on a chalkboard the whole time. You two are podcasters, so you listen to your voice a lot, I bet. But at the beginning of being a podcaster, I bet you're like, that's what my voice sounds like. Oh no, right? It's kind of like the human thing to do is to be like, that's me. Like scary, hate it. So imagine watching yourself come of age, to transition, to preserve a part of yourself that you're like, nah, I don't want that out there for everybody to remember. Totally. And then that's the thing that everybody remembers. And so there was a lot of mourning in post-production. And I will say the edit was completely based around the Joey interview. We started with the Joey interview, and then we built backwards, and then we built forwards for the end. But we wanted to make sure that everything was leading up to that interview in the climax, because that's not only the point where the movie changes, but it's also a point where my life gets to change.
Yeah.
And so it was very vulnerable, including so much of the Joey interview. That interview went on for a couple of hours, you know? So we were including the most that we could to get the point across to the audience. And most of that happened in rapid succession, those conversations, you know, what you see in that like 10 minutes of the Joey interview. And, you know, I remember turning to our editor, Sharika Ajay Kumar, who's incredible, who did such a phenomenal job editing this movie. I can't believe it's her first feature as an editor.
Wow.
She was just like my right-hand person throughout post-production. I couldn't have done this without her and Lauren and Alex Schmitter, who was the producer on it. They were just like always talking to me about it because, you know, I was very concerned. I wanted to make sure that it worked and that it didn't look like a vanity piece, and that the people who spoke their truths in this movie, including Joey, Guinevere, Kevin, Scott, people who were vulnerable on the record with us, that they felt honored. But I was also always having these conversations with myself of like, Sav, the filmmaker, knows this is a more interesting movie, and Sav, the person, hates this because Sav, the person, didn't want to be in this. And so, like, I'm not saying that like being in my own movie was like a big act of altruism, but there was a lot of negotiation because being a documentary participant is hard shit. And I have respect for every single person who agrees to be a documentary participant, because they know they're opening themselves up to a degree of scrutiny that is really challenging, you know? And so getting to meet like Harper from Will and Harper and just like be friends with her, just like somebody else who gets it, you know, somebody else who understands like how like vulnerable and hard that is. And so massive respect to anybody who's ever been a documentary participant. And I think this will, as much as it was painful, you know, the response has been so kind that I'm like, okay, like this is good. But also the more important thing is that it makes my work better moving forward, because there's not a documentary participant that I can't look in the eye and say, I know what this is like, you know, like let's work together so that this feels okay for you. And also as an actor, where I'm like, hey, I know what it's like to stand 50 feet tall and get all of the blame if something goes wrong, or all the praise if something goes right. Let's talk about what this means, and like, let's make sure that you're good and comfortable. So as much as it was a lot of growing pains, I have come out on the other side really thankful for it, even though I think it'll take a few more years before I can look back and laugh too much.
AC, if you were to put yourself in Sav's shoes, what would be the piece of media that you would like try to interview the filmmaker, etc., living or dead?
To be honest, it would be School of Rock, like for sure.
Bless, yeah.
Which would just be
I need you and Linklater to grow out.
Genuinely humiliating. Me and Jack Black queening out, you know, vibes.
But then you could rotoscope the whole thing, and that might also help with some of the vulnerability.
Exactly. And we go to space. Whatever.
I'm curious, Sav, how often do you watch Chasing Amy nowadays?
Never.
I wondered, because it kind of felt like, you know, sometimes you have those, especially in the DVD era, of like, this is just, I'm playing this 10 times in a row. And then now it's like, you have to really make that choice. So you picking the movie up and putting it on?
No, it's not even that. It's that it was my job for 6.5 years. And I'm like, I'm good. I can close my eyes and play it projected on the back of my eyelids, you know? So I have that shit locked in there. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you make something your job, it becomes, I think, inherently less fun. But also if that's tied to like a serious period of your life with incredible growth, and now you know all these people, and you know, you see how the conversations went, you know, it's it doesn't feel as like much of an escape as it used to. Now I have other movies for that. I have Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. You know?
Yes.
I was gonna ask, banger. That's a good one. Yeah. And what's next for you work-wise? Like, do you have anything on the docket? Nonfiction, fiction? What are you exploring next?
Oh gosh, I mean, no there's one project I can talk about, but for the most part, there's a lot of projects that are like, being talked about and things like that. But, nothing's ever real till there's money in your bank account. So various projects in degrees of development hell. And then, just trying to make the next thing. So the next thing that I have on the docket, it's scripted because I've long wanted to go back to that. I haven't had a chance to make a scripted film since I was basically in college. And so taking everything that I've learned over the last, 6.5 years, I'm making the short film called Pancake Skank. Thank you. Which is, this like fucksticks friendship story, sci-fi, fantasy, surrealist comedy that's set in this world of always nighttime. Where there's this urban legend called the Pancake Skank, and there's also the most unremarkable man who ever lived named Loverboy, who wants to be her sidekick to learn how to be remarkable. And so it's this like very specific, fun friendship story that I would call it like Sorry to Bother You meets Scott Pilgrim in some ways.
Cool.
With a little bit of Streets of Fire in there. So all that to say, I'm really excited to make something fun. Go back to summer camp with my friends, so to speak, make this new one, and have something else out there while we try to get more money for the big projects.
Love that. I feel like that's right up the alley of a lot of our listeners. That's great.
Big time.
Amazing.
It should be really fun, honestly. We'll probably do a crowdfunding campaign at some point just because I want to connect with the audience. Like, we're fundraising right now, but I want the people who want to see it to see it. That's the exciting part of the internet. That's the other than going to streaming to die, the fun part is that it's much easier to find your audience now.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much. That has been our show for today. Sav, where can people watch the movie? Where can they learn more about you and what's coming next?
Chasing Amy is available to watch everywhere in the United States and Canada. We're on VOD, so you can rent it everywhere. Right now, we're also on Kanopy for free. I believe it costs 2 of your little library credits, but I promise you the 92 minutes go very fast, and ideally you'll laugh and maybe you'll cry. And then for me, I'm on the internet. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram. Sav Rodgers Film on Instagram. Sav Rodgers on Blue Sky. And just trying to make the next thing.
Love that. Well, thank you, Sav. I'm AC Lamberty. You can find me at AC Lamberty on Instagram and Letterboxd. I'm
Kat Spada. You can find me at kat_ex_machina on Twitter and Letterboxd. I guess Twitter, who knows? And be sure to follow Feminist Frequency on all the platforms at femfreq.
And if you're a Patreon subscriber, please be sure to stick around for the bonus episode.
If you like our show, please help other people find it by sharing, subscribing, rating, and commenting on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much, Sav, and thank you, listeners, for listening.
Bye.